Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're taking a closer look at vitamin D deficiency.
Awesome.
We're going to explore those signs, those things that might point to low vitamin D levels, and then kind of dig into the causes. A lot of people know that vitamin D is important for strong bones, but there's so much more to it than that, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
It really is fascinating just how much vitamin D impacts our bodies, in ways that we don't often think about.
Yeah, and actually, when I was kind of going through the notes and the research for this, I was really surprised by some of the things that popped up.
Hmm.
Like muscle aches and even hair loss can be connected to vitamin D.
Yeah, they can be early warning signs, definitely.
And what I found really interesting is that a lot of people are actually walking around with a deficiency and they don't even realize it.
Right. And they're attributing, their symptoms to other things when really it could be this underlying vitamin D issue.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that really stood out to me too was the connection between binge eating and vitamin D.
Right? That was a surprise to me. So how does that work? Like, how can low vitamin D actually lead to overeating?
Well, you see, vitamin D actually plays a role in regulating our hormones, especially a hormone called leptin.
Okay.
And leptin is that hormone that tells our brain that we're full. So when we have enough vitamin D, leptin is working properly.
Uh-huh.
It sends those signals to our brain, we feel satisfied after a meal. But when our vitamin D levels are low, that leptin signaling can get disrupted, and we end up feeling hungry even when we've eaten enough.
Oh, wow. So it's not just about willpower, right? It's like a biological thing that's happening.
Absolutely. It's like your body is constantly sending those hunger signals.
And that makes a lot of sense. Now, what about hair loss? How does vitamin D tie into that?
Well, vitamin D is really important for the health of our hair follicles. Think of it as kind of like a fertilizer for your hair. So when vitamin D levels are low, those hair follicles, they can weaken and they can have trouble growing new hair, and that can lead to hair thinning or even hair loss in some cases.
Mhm.
So it's like the foundation for a healthy hair growth.
Yeah, exactly. It's supporting those follicles from the inside out.
Okay, so we've talked about some pretty unexpected signs of vitamin D deficiency, but I think a lot of us, experience muscle aches from time to time, especially maybe after a workout. So
Yeah.
how can you tell if it's just, typical soreness or if it's something more serious like a vitamin D issue?
Well, I think, a little bit of muscle soreness after a workout is totally normal. It's actually a good sign that you've challenged your muscles.
Okay.
But if you're experiencing those aches and pains, even without strenuous activity, or if it's a persistent thing that doesn't really go away,
Uh-huh.
that could be a sign that something else is going on.
Huh.
And vitamin D actually plays a role in muscle function and repair. So when we're deficient, it can lead to muscle weakness, pain, and even reduced endurance.
So if you're just like feeling tired or sore, even if you've gotten enough sleep, it might be worth thinking about vitamin D.
Yeah, for sure. Especially if it's accompanied by some of those other symptoms we've been talking about, the hair loss or the cravings. Those could all be pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about some of the more unexpected signs of deficiency. Now, let's kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about what actually causes this deficiency in the first place. I think, a lot of people just think it's about not getting enough sun. Is that the whole story?
Well, sun exposure is definitely a big part of it.
Hmm.
Our skin naturally produces vitamin D when it's exposed to sunlight, but there's a lot more to it than just spending time outdoors.
Okay, so someone could live in like a really sunny place and still be deficient.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just about the amount of sun. It's about how well your body is actually able to make vitamin D from that sun exposure.
So what are some of the things that can impact that process?
Well, skin tone plays a role.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have darker complexion, your skin naturally has more melanin, which acts like a natural sunscreen. So you actually need more sun exposure to produce the same amount of vitamin D as someone with lighter skin.
Interesting. Okay.
And then where you live also matters a lot.
Yeah.
The farther you are from the equator, the angle of the sun's rays changes. And during certain times of the year, there's simply not enough UVB radiation reaching the Earth's surface to really trigger that vitamin D production.
So even if you're like out there trying to soak up the sun in the winter, you might not be getting what you need.
Right.
And I guess even if you live in a sunny place, if you're spending most of your time indoors for work or whatever, that's also limiting your sun exposure.
Absolutely. Think about how much time do you actually spend outside each day?
Not as much as I probably should.
Right. And it all adds up and can contribute to those lower vitamin D levels.
So I'm starting to realize that a lot of us might be at risk without even knowing it.
More common than you might think.
And we haven't even touched on the other factors like age, medical conditions, even medications.
Yeah, there's a whole range of things that can impact vitamin D levels.
Okay, this is getting really interesting, so let's explore those other factors in more detail.
Let's do it.
Okay, so we've talked about how where you live and your skin tone and how much time you spend outside can all play a role in vitamin D levels. But you also mentioned age, right? Like, as we get older, that can also impact things.
Yeah, absolutely. As we age, our skin actually becomes less efficient at producing vitamin D from sunlight.
Oh, really? So even if you're like, you know, keeping up with your same habits, you might not be making as much?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like our internal vitamin D factory kind of slows down a little bit.
Huh. What about medical conditions? Are there certain conditions that can affect vitamin D?
Yeah, there are a few. So certain conditions like celiac disease or Crohn's disease, they can actually affect how well your gut absorbs vitamin D from food.
Okay.
So even if you're eating, vitamin D rich foods, your body might not be able to use it effectively.
So it's not just about getting enough, it's about absorbing it too.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like having a leaky pipe.
Yeah.
You can turn on the water full blast, but if there's a leak, you're not going to get all that water.
Makes sense. And you mentioned medications earlier too. Are there certain medications that can kind of mess with vitamin D levels?
Yeah, some medications can interfere with how our bodies metabolize and use vitamin D.
Okay.
Things like certain cholesterol-lowering drugs, some types of steroids, and even some weight loss medications can actually deplete vitamin D levels.
Oh, wow. So it sounds like it's really important to talk to your doctor about potential interactions if you're taking any of those medications.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, open communication with your doctor is key. Make sure they're aware of all the medications and supplements you're taking so they can help you monitor your vitamin D levels.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in terms of the signs and causes of vitamin D deficiency, but I'm also curious about the impact. Like, beyond the obvious bone health connection, how does this deficiency actually affect the body?
Right. Well, that's where things get really interesting. We've touched on a few of the impacts already, like, fatigue, muscle aches, and even hair loss. But vitamin D's influence is much broader than that. It really impacts almost every system in the body.
So it's not just about strong bones, it's really about overall well-being.
Exactly. For example, you mentioned frequent infections in your notes. Well, vitamin D plays a critical role in supporting our immune system. It helps our immune cells fight off invaders like bacteria and viruses.
So if we're low on D, our immune system isn't as strong.
Exactly. It's kind of like sending an army into battle without the right equipment. They might still fight, but they're not going to be as effective.
Makes sense. What about the connection between vitamin D and mental health? We talked about low mood and sleep problems.
Right. Well, vitamin D actually plays a role in producing and regulating certain neurotransmitters, including serotonin.
Okay.
That feel-good hormone that impacts our mood, our sleep, and even our appetite.
So if you're low on D, it can mess with your brain chemistry.
Yeah, it can lead to those mood disorders like depression and anxiety.
Okay.
And, when our serotonin levels are off, it can disrupt our sleep-wake cycles, which leads to insomnia, fatigue, and difficulty concentrating.
So if you're feeling mentally foggy, struggling to sleep, or just down in the dumps, vitamin D could be a factor.
Absolutely. It's always a good idea to rule out any potential nutritional deficiencies before jumping to conclusions about other causes.
Right. It seems like vitamin D is like this master regulator in the body, affecting everything from our bones to our brains.
It really is. And what's interesting is that a lot of people don't even consider vitamin D when they're experiencing these types of symptoms.
Yeah, they're probably thinking of a million other things first.
Right. So it's important to raise awareness about how vital vitamin D is for our overall health, beyond just the strong bones message.
Okay, so what does this all mean for our listener? Like, what should they be taking away from this information?
I think the key takeaway here is that vitamin D deficiency is way more common than people realize, and it can show up in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
But the good news is it's often easily addressed.
Okay.
Whether that's through lifestyle changes like safe sun exposure, incorporating vitamin D-rich foods into your diet, and in some cases, a supplement might be recommended by a doctor.
It sounds like awareness is key. Knowing those signs and being proactive about our health.
Absolutely. It's about taking control of your well-being.
It really does seem like it's something that's so often overlooked, but it can make a huge difference in how you feel.
Yeah, it really can. And the research on vitamin D is always evolving. They're constantly finding new ways that it impacts our health.
It's pretty amazing. So it sounds like, just being aware of the signs and, taking steps to get your levels checked can make a really big difference.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
about taking charge of your well-being.
Well, I think you've given everyone listening a lot to think about today. So before we wrap up, let's just recap those key takeaways one more time just to make sure they really stick.
Sure.
So first, we learned that vitamin D deficiency is really common, and it can show up in a bunch of different ways. Like we talked about muscle aches, fatigue, hair loss, low mood, even a weakened immune system.
Right. And we talked about all those factors that can contribute to the deficiency.
Hmm.
Things like limited sun exposure,
Yeah.
your age, your skin tone, medical conditions, certain medications.
Yeah, so it's not always as straightforward as just, get more sun. There's a lot more to it.
Exactly. And we also discussed how vitamin D is important for so much more than just bone health.
Mm.
It plays a role in immune function, mental well-being. It might even protect against some chronic diseases.
So if you're feeling off and you just can't quite figure out why it might be time to, think about vitamin D.
Yeah, talk to your doctor, get
Yeah.
your levels checked. You might be surprised by what you find out.
Yeah, it's like solving a mystery, right? Figuring out what's going on.
It really is.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the solution is simpler than you think.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive on vitamin D deficiency. Hopefully everyone listening feels a little bit more empowered to, take charge of their health and explore whether vitamin D could be, that missing piece for them.
Yeah, it's been great chatting with you about this.
And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.